Lecture 18, Dostoevsky, The Brothers Karamazov, Part 1.
In the framework of this course and of the European novel, Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov is a seismic event. It's like an eruption of something entirely new and different, it seems to me, in European literature, in particular, man's relation to God. Because if you think about what we've been looking at, starting back with Defoe and Sterne, Laclos, even Dickens, Balzac, God is never absent from these texts, but never quite at the center either, as we see here. We know that Nietzsche had proclaimed God is dead, but Dostoevsky's interest is, how does one live with this possible event, this possible outcome? How could you measure human life, human doing, human feeling, human wanting, without this compass? Now, we may think that this is a kind of dated historic crisis, but I want to suggest it's time to rethink that. That Dostoevsky's God-haunted creatures are our contemporaries. And in his book, the Enlightenment legacy of rationality comes across as something cold, sterile, and perhaps ultimately evil. I quote the poet William Blake, "Rational truth is not the truth of Christ, but of Pilate." Now look around you today. The God-centered world has never been more at issue than it is in our time. We who may be living at the end of the Enlightenment will find that Dostoevsky's view of the warfare that takes place in the human soul sheds a kind of light, a kind of terrible light, it seems to me, on our own doings, our own events. The tortured people in his books are not simply phantasms of the Russian past. They are, in some sense, our contemporaries. Their crisis is also one that we have to deal with. So how does that fit against the novel form, the 19th century novel, where we are with Dostoevsky? As I've said before, we frequently have an all too narrow and thin view of what a novel is, a depiction of characters against a social backdrop. And this trim model has some validity with a number of British texts, French texts, but it will not take the measure of people like Dostoevsky, or for that matter, Melville, because they blow sky high this neat scheme, and they bring metaphysics, soul, and God into the mix in unforgettable ways. The Brothers Karamazov, like the Oedipal story of Sophocles, takes place against the backdrop of a parricide, centers around a parricide. Why would you choose to write a novel about a murder? And why, in particular, with Dostoevsky, would you want this murder to be a mystery, unsolved, not clear who did it? Dostoevsky's book reads like a detective story. It has lots of detective conventions in it. It lays out clues. It has candidates for the killer. It closes with a trial. But I think what's most profound, most interesting about it is that it leaves ultimately the issue in the dark, as if he wanted to say, if you look at a murder that in a sense is anonymous, in a sense is communal, in a sense could be committed by a whole number of people, then what you're looking at is not some sort of sleuthing plot, but you're looking right into the pit, into a black hole. Everybody could be guilty. This is much more insidious and much more interesting than a kind of straightforward whodunit story. And moreover, many of the characters in this book are going to discover over the course of the novel their own hideous complicity with this murder. Well, we know technically early on fairly well what happened. That the older son, Dmitri, who is the most likely candidate for murderer, is going to be stuck with it. And he's going to be judged guilty, even though we come to understand that he is innocent, technically innocent.